Hello there, Xano builders. On today's tutorial, we will learn about the basic setups that you must do while building in Xano, and also good tips and tricks that will save you a ton of time. So let's get started. Okay, the first trick, it's a basic one. You need to have environment variables. You need to also have environment variables for production and staging. And a nice trick is to have a function where you pass the environment where you are, and it returns you the whole list of variables that you have for a certain environment. So for example, if you're in staging, it will return you all the environment variables from staging specifically. Second tip, create functions for flows that you will be reusing constantly. Don't be recreating the same scenarios for every single API endpoint. This is not maintainable. This is not scalable. Let's imagine you want to send an email to a user. In many tools, they give you a proper structure to use their API. You need to have a function in order to reuse this API request to this tool in all of the emails that you will need to send throughout the whole app. Third tip, super important, set up proper descriptions and naming for all of your APIs functions. And now use the AI tool in order to generate nodes around your whole function editor. So you can, if another user goes into your API or your function, they can understand better the setup that you have created. This is super useful for complex flows where it's a little harder to understand the visual editor of Xano, but it must be a standard if you want to create a project that is scalable that can be taken by another person. Fourth scenario, create branches from scratch. Xano allows you to have different branches of your API request, function, etc. Not databases. Databases, you have different data sources, but create branches from scratch. This is key because it will allow you to work with the staging and production. And once you're ready to push to production, then you can push a new version of that branch. But I suggest to always start working with branches from scratch. It's not a must. Obviously, once you're in production, it's key that you have another branch in order for you not to make updates directly to production. But yeah, it's a good tip to get started with Xano. Also, fifth tip, it's important that you use database sources. It's important that you have a production database and a test database as well. Once you get started with a project, even though you are not in production yet, I suggest to have a test data source. In that way, you can create dummy data without affecting any, real information, real production data once you launch the app. Sixth tip, now that we have database triggers, enable database triggers in order to set up repetitive flows. Let's set up the scenario where we have a verification email. Once you have been verified, we will send you an email that says, congratulations, your account has been verified. We can set up this in the API request where they verify their account, or we can set it up in a database trigger. Once a record has been updated and the boolean of verified is true, then we can trigger this email. Why this works? Because the verification process might change in the future. And it will be just awesome that this scenario where we're triggering the email has been automated via the database trigger instead of the API flow, because we will need to then recreate and invest more time in order to set up this. So always think ahead of time before you start setting up this type of scenarios or repetitive things that can be done with database triggers, because you might have an internal dashboard that could verify the user from the admin side. You have different scenarios. Think in these type of scenarios that will definitely save you time in the future. For large database sets, it's important that you set up database indexes. This will definitely improve the loading time for the queries that you make to these tables. Now, if this is a table that doesn't have that many records and it's being constantly updated, I wouldn't suggest it. It won't really make that much of a difference. But if it's a large database that is not constantly updated, but people is always pulling requests from this table, it's always good to have indexes in order to make queries load quicker. You can definitely watch the Xano tutorial because it's a pretty good one. This always happens to people who are building in Xano. Please disable the public documentation once you go to production. You don't want to keep the Swagger documentation public once your app is live, please. And even worse, if you have any request that is pulling data from your database that you don't need to be authenticated. So please make sure that your Swagger documentation has been disabled. A really cool tip is that you can use a state of change Chrome extension in order to disable this super quickly. Avoid using the table connectors in your Xano functions or APIs. This will pull the whole structure of your table, and it will save you time while building an API request where you need to, create this record and, start generating or creating input by input. But this is the thing. This won't help you in the future if you start adding more fields into this table, because the function or the API will start pulling these new requests, and you might not need those inputs in that API or function. And this as well doesn't give you total control over your APIs. You start losing control over what you have created. So I wouldn't suggest to use these database connectors with your whole table, because as I said, once you start creating new records, or new fields, or removing fields, it could affect your API or break your function. So my suggestion here is to create input by input. I know it takes time. Now we have the Xano MCP or even the Xano AI builder that we could help save some time there. But either way, great suggestion. Super important, and this is a must do on large and complex functions and APIs. If you have such a complex logic in one of your functions or API flows, please use lambdas. Use lambdas. This will definitely simplify your work. You can use a tool like ChatGPT that I feel is way better than the AI that Xano allows you to use inside your lambdas. This will give you a really good result. You will save a ton of time. You can just create your logic, replace the certain variables with your inputs from Xano or variables from Xano, and this will work just fine. It's a cool suggestion. You can even check the speed times, and I think lambdas work just great. Cool suggestion. Xano doesn't have that much documentation about this, but my suggestion for really complex queries with multiple relationship of tables, you can always use joins, add-ons, complex filtering with joins, but sometimes it just gets too messy, also with pagination. So my suggestion is to use SQL queries. Xano allows you to run SQL queries in order to pull data for certain tables, and you can create really complex scenarios for filtering and search functionality. So that's a great tip also. So this was the section of basic tips that you must follow in Xano for 2026 that I think everyone should do on every single project. Now let's talk about how can you speed up your setup with Xano. So please, on all of your projects, try to save functions or APIs that you might use in other projects. That's key. Try to also use the APIs that Xano has in the marketplace. They have snippets or full authentication flows that you can reuse. Sometimes they need a few tweaks here and there, but it just works fine in order to save you time to create like a login flow or a sign-up flow. You don't need to build it from scratch. You can use the marketplace snippet that Xano has. Something I haven't really tried that much, but I think it will save you a ton of time in the future, because I know Xano is working on this actively, is to use their MCP from any IDE, like Visual Studio Code, Cursor, and start working directly with your APIs and functions from your code editor. Yes, I think Xano needs to get ahead of this because things are getting complicated. We have Cloud Code is doing a fantastic job, supabase MCPs, so Xano needs to speed up here in order for us to be able to use Cloud Code and work with their MCP in order for us to build super quick backends. This is the next step. You know, we already built complex logics with Xano. We already built really cool things with Xano, but now we need to build quicker. People need to be delivering results quicker. That's definitely, development will get cheaper in the future because it's easier to reach for everyone now that we have such a cool things like Cloud Code. So it's a good point. I think this will improve a ton, and I think we will stop even using the function editor, the visual editor that Xano has. Will be more use human language in order to be building our logic. What will be key, it's how we express our needs to these AI tools in order for us to get the best result out of them. But I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I know it's a quick one, but I hope it's useful and you get some tips out of it. And also, if you have any tips, any suggestions, something that I didn't share on this video, please go ahead and share them with the community. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you can subscribe and like the tutorial. Thank you very much.